Hey everyone, today we're going to be breaking outside of my normal mold, and instead of doing metalworking, I'm going to be doing some resin casting to recreate this gear. It's a fairly detailed part and it needs to be pretty high strength, which is why we're not 3D printing it or anything like that. We're going to be casting it out of a high impact resin. Here's the original, here's the duplicate. You can see the detail on the back as well. These came out beautifully and I'm real happy with it. This video is going to be a little bit more of a walkthrough on how to do resin casting rather than just a showcase of making something. So I hope you'll join me for the adventure as we learn something together. Thanks. So the first thing we need to do is build a cavity for our mold to get cast into. I'm going to do that with a little plate of steel and some 3-inch strapping, just because that's what I have on hand as scrap. My preferred method would be something like 5mm MDF or acrylic hot glued together, but I don't have any of that around. So obviously this mold isn't waterproof or silicone rubber proof or anything like that. So what I'm going to use is a little bit of acrylic caulking to cover any gaps in this mold. It's just the easiest way to do it and still going to make it easy to take apart later on. Now we're going to mark how far up the mold we want our first layer of resin to go. Need about 1/4 inch underneath the bottom of your detail if you're using a solid base. If you're not using something solid, if you're using something flexible like a plastic tub, add a little bit more. The silicone base gets mixed at a 10:1 ratio with this catalyst or activator over here. And we're going to do that in a 1-quart mixing tub. I'm going to fill this up to 10 ounces, and I'm going to add an ounce of catalyst, mix that up, and probably do that 2 times. Wear gloves for this. I'm going to be using these small mixing cups with marks on the side of them. I bought these on Amazon. There'll be a link in the description. So you just pour that mix right into your mold. So take the time to mix it up once again in the mold. So it's definitely not a required step, but I would suggest degassing the mold before you actually insert your part if you're doing it like this where your part's going to get pushed down, just so you have less air bubbles coming out when you actually do go to insert your part. Let's go ahead and do that. So what's happening right now is as any entrapped air in the rubber is sucked out by this vacuum, it's going to expand quite a bit, just like foam would in sudsy water. When it does that, it poofs the top of the silicone rubber. If you don't watch that, it'll overflow your mold. That's why your mold does need to be a good bit taller than the object you're trying to make. So what I'm going to do is let this sink back down. It's still holding a vacuum right now. And then I'm going to repeat that 2 or 3 times. Now we'll take our piece that we want to mold, spray some mold release on it. Now because this piece has these open cavities and it's less dense than the silicone, it wants to float, so we're going to have to weigh it down. Alright, that took a little while, but I like it, so we're going to put it back under vacuum. You want to let the air back into the chamber very slowly when you do this, when you release the pressure. If you let it in too fast, what you're going to do is actually push down on the part and deform it, or you can make those bubbles pop in a way that leaves a big cavity. Okay, so we've got this all set and it is ready to go. So that mold needs to set for about 24 hours before it be totally firmed up and we can make the second part of it. I'm gonna jump now to the last mold I made so I can get this video out faster for you guys to see. So in order to build the second part of this mold, I'm gonna be using some of this 1/8 inch rod, the same rod I used in my offset lettering signs, to support the top of it, since the gear has a giant open cavity that will need to be supported. So what I've done is cut and bent 3 pieces that'll get set at angles like this, or into the new silicone that's going to go on this top here. Should do the trick. I just need to make some indentations in this piece to allow for easily realigning the new mold once it's done. Alright, well that is a very crude way of doing it, but these 3 alignment holes will just help me to line the top piece back up when I go to install it. Now everything needs a ptfe film over it, and I'm going to do this in a bunch of coats because I really don't want these sticking together. So we now have our silicone base and our silicone activator, and we're going to mix them together, adding the activator slowly. It would have been a good idea to wear gloves. This stuff doesn't have any interaction with your skin unless you live in California, because everything there causes cancer. So we've poured in about half of the silicone. I'm going to go ahead and add in these metal stakes. Just going to take all 3 of them. Put them there every third of the way around us. There we go. We're going to interlace them like that so that no one of them sinks all the way to the bottom. And the whole point of these is just to support the open end of the mold once this is all removed, and you know, the gear is a big open span and the silicone isn't going to hold that, so every casting you get out of it would have a dip in it. This silicone's workability is about 2 hours, and then it takes about 18 hours to set up fully. I like to give it a full 24 just to make sure that it doesn't tear or deform in any way. Well, I'm gonna have a whole lot of cleanup in the bottom of my vacuum chamber when I get done with this. We're gonna let it sit here at a vacuum, let it leak down, and take a look at it. Probably have to add more rubber now. That was some work. So here's our 2-part mold. So what happened with this bottom mold is the small little pieces that make up this channel right here got warped when I put this back in. So what I've done is cast just some throwaway resin on it, which will heat up and hopefully soften this mold enough that they'll return to their place. Even if they're not 100% perfect, I'll be able to sand them to be good enough to mate onto the piece they need to. So as we get ready to cast a gear with this 2-part mold, I've got both sides of the mold cleaned up. So the silicone base and the resin I'm going to be using are both from hobbysilicone.com. They're just a real good company. They're not a sponsor at all. They don't even know I'm doing this video. But they refund you the difference between the shipping charge you get and the actual shipping cost. It just shows that they're a good company to deal with. And the quality of the product has been good every time I've used them. We're going to go ahead and spray the mold with ptfe mold release and then line up our halves. You want to add a little bit of weight to the mold to keep the top down so the resin doesn't try and seep out along your parting line. Now I've measured the gear that went in here via water displacement by pushing it down into a bucket of water and seeing how much the water moved. And I know that it takes around about 7 ounces of resin. So I'm going to fill this cup up to 4 ounces with part A and then up to 8 ounces with part B of the resin and then mix. You'll notice when you pour the resin that it's actually kind of cloudy, and then as you mix it, it clears up. I have no idea why that happens, but don't be alarmed if it does to you. Now this is 3-minute resin, which means it's going to set to where you can't even pour it within 3 minutes. So you need to be ready to move fast. And then watch your mold, because it's probably going to suck up a little bit more resin as either resin flows into the parting line or air bubbles escape. And there you go. Okay, so this casting has set in the mold. Now we need to take it apart. There we go. Fortunately, I filled up this cap space here with quite a bit of resin, so I had to cut all that away. So there we go. Top comes off, and the mold's pretty much come off clean. Now here's the gear in the mold. You can see that some of the resin will run out along your parting line. It's just part of the process. Now, because this piece has a lot of surface area around the outside here, and we have to pull it straight up, there's a lot of friction. So you need to go around with your fingers and just break that connection everywhere. Every mold is going to be different, of course. Then I like to use an air gun. I have this gun set to about 60 psi, but I'm not pulling it back all the way when I use it to break the casting free of the mold. And now this garbage that's in this channel is the effect of that earlier damage to the mold. That just has to get cleaned out with an abrasive blade. So in order to clean up the top of the casting here and some of this flash, I believe it's called, around the edge of these teeth, you could just run a knife around them. But what's a lot easier to do is to grab an orbital sander. I've got 80 grit paper on here and just have at it. Alright, and there's the pretty well finished product. It's a little bit of flash still left to take off, but I'm going to process them all together at the end. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me along with that build. This was a great learning process for me, and I hope that some of the mistakes I made will help you avoid them when you do it. Don't be intimidated by the process, and don't be upset if you fail. This is the mold that we made, and it's just about perfect. This is the 4th attempt for me. So, I make things every day, and I have a pretty good idea how things are gonna go. It still took me 4 tries to get it right, and I messed up a bunch of castings along the way. So don't be afraid to go out there and try something new. If you like that build and you want to see some of my others, go ahead and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram for pictures of projects that don't make it to YouTube, like all these gates behind me. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed making these. Here's a video I think you might like, and here's one YouTube thinks you'll like. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.